Hello, Sacha.
Hi, Amanda. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us here in South Africa.
Great pleasure here in Bali.
Yay. I love your breeze, your storm, your storm.
It's a good place to be watching the apocalypse from, I can tell you that much.
Absolutely. I see you're doing quite well in the apocalypse, taking it with a lot of grace.
We're doing it very well here, yeah. I see that the Federal Reserve has been decommissioned, declawed, and defanged as per my predictions by the U.S. Treasury Department, and a delightful new day has been birthed, I believe.
Yes, I chose to sit behind these gold panels because I thought that could be our discussion. So, yeah, this got disconnected again. Let's just wait for Sacha. Hi, Sacha.
Try again, shall we?
I was just saying, I was thinking that could be our discussion. I chose to sit behind these gold panels. I thought we could talk about the, the global financial reset and the whole alchemy story that's going on the planet. And I know from the last video that you spoke a lot about wanting to go in a little bit more in depth into the Babylonian, the dream spell and that kind of information connected to finances. I don't know if you want to just jump right in.
I'm happy to do so. I mean, just to speak in the context of what's happened in the last couple of days, the Federal Reserve has been declawed and defanged and is now the bitch of the U.S. Treasury Department, which is exactly as it ought to have been for the last 3/4 of a century, or the last century in point of fact. So very, very good news for humankind, if you ask me, and also testament to the fact that this Corona Pantomime is indeed a smokescreen behind which this rejigging of the planetary social economy and social ecology is taking place. This white hat game that we mentioned briefly in our earlier conversation. So I'd suggest that this is a very, very good time, and we're about to move into the deconstruction era of false light economics and Luciferian blood economy. This is beyond amazing news as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
and let me caveat let me say that I already hear the chorus of dissent amongst the naysayers and the delusionists and the apocalypticians and the Armageddonists, because they are absolutely pegged heart, mind, and soul to this apocalyptic narrative, that this is all New World Order, this is all takedown of Homo sapien. No, it bloody is not. And frankly, to my fellow pundits and activists who are anchoring their expression to this New World Order apocalyptic narrative, you guys are fast becoming the big problem, because you are the ones fomenting hysteria and then promulgating that hysteria, that fear reflexivity into the gestalt. Shame on you. There's a point at which you need to be objective enough to stand back and go, actually, the entire alchemy of reality is under transformation, transmutation. It is what it is. If you cannot plug in to the vibral nature of the unfoldment of what's actually really happening, not what you think is happening, not what you've been programmed to think by this Armageddonist mindset, but if you can't plug into what's actually happening, then you ought not to have a voice and be aired. That's my view right now. I'm shocked by the negativism that is coming out of something which is so clearly a self-elected a phenomenon. This whole Corona pantomime is the great tribulation. It's the great tribulation / resurrection. It's an archetypal myth that we are conjuring into manifestation. So let's dream wisely.
Yeah, I loved what you said the other day, and I know you speak about it often in your videos about us as the alchemists and this global alchemy that is happening, and how, you know, we must really come into the reality of our own divine nature, and that we are really creating this reality to unfold in the way that we are perceiving it. So we must, you know, choose wisely with what we do with our perceptions, our words, our thoughts, because we're driving this vehicle. So where do we want it to go, and how do we want it to unfold? Not towards an apocalyptic catastrophe, but towards some kind of exquisite birth of this new human, this new sovereign world, this new earth.
Well, let's move beyond even that. Let's just throw ourselves, mind, body, and soul, into the embodiment, the principle of embodiment, and thereby catalyzing the manifestation of our highest dreams, our highest expression, our highest bliss, and you know, throw ourselves fully into it. I'm fully immersed in that space right now with what we're doing here. With the New Earth Haven project, how we're developing out the New Earth Festival concept for later this year, this reconvention, this Regenesis spark of mystical traditions and of super consciousness and of quantum biological breakthroughs, innovations, technologies. All this stuff is confluencing in the now, and we simply want to place our full attention in that being and that doing, because that's the stuff that's gonna burgeon into the new earth. So I've already moved beyond this is it, isn't it, will it, won't it, apocalypse ascension. I've moved beyond this bullshit dialectic. That was then, that was 12 years ago, 10 years ago, 2012, 7, 8 years ago, a generation ago. It's over. We're here. What do you feel? What do you know to be true? What is that emergence? Sense it. Connect with it. This is the activation of the psionic intelligence, the telepathic communication. This is what we've been dreaming of in our highest state of soulfulness. So let's just engage this wave. Get your surfboard out, jump, catch the wave. Stop the blah blah, stop the white noise.
Absolutely. It's a very beautiful time. If people can turn away from, I guess you could say, this I don't know if you call it a dream spell, is that right? Like the Babylonian dream spell. Maybe could you outline what that actually means?
Sure. It's a self-imposed exile from our supernature. It is the disconnect from source. It is the severing of the umbilical of our connection to the universal mind. And it's something which each of us have volunteered to do, to disconnect. But now is the time for reconvention, for reconvening that umbilical connection. So let's just get on with it, step into that flame. It'll hurt a little, it'll burn a little. That's what facing down to who we are and what we've done, and the process of absolving ourselves. I'm sorry for banging on about the subject, but absolution and redemption is so vital in this alchemy of becoming. We have been indentured into believing by these bullshit monotheistic religious ideas. We've been led to believe, or we have led ourselves to believe, that redemption and salvation exists out there, that it is something on the golden horizon that we must move toward, that we need to bang our head and, you know, shuffle, do whatever these genuflections tell us to do. Nonsense. The redemption was never out there. The salvation was never out there. The absolution was never out there. All of that stuff takes place within the inner alchemy. And when that takes place, the Christed light, the Christ principle, not the effigy, not the totem, the Christed light is what we then behold. That is the stuff that absolves us. And this is where the monotheistic traditions have completely mind-fucked us civilizationally and completely disconnected us from the true narrative. which is a relationship with self, the little self to the capitalized self. And once we've engaged that, that's called coherence. Moving into coherence with the divine blueprint that exists within you, within me. This is my highest calling, to step into that supernature. But the process of doing so is uncomfortable, variously. One has to relinquish false gods. One has to relinquish false notions about self, about relationship, about life, about reality, about history, about everything. And you have to disidentify and move into a place of abject stillness. And this stillness is terrifying to most people, because that stillness is it's the cavern. It's the point of regenesis. As our beloved Credo Mutwa knows, his own regenesis point was thrust upon him in order to make him a Sangoma. He was abducted at the Matopus Hills in southern Africa into an underground military chamber where he was operated on by Zeta Reticulan alien greys and complicit with some of the military industrial complex in this country. And that was back in the 50s or 60s. You know, that was his return to the cavern, where he was holed up thereafter and had to eat some alien flesh, if you remember, which he mentioned tasted like a rusty coin, a brass coin. He described that rite of passage very well. That was his way of going into the death and rebirth. He had to literally eat the flesh of an alien in order to become reborn into his supernature, become a Sangoma. Now, in a great sense, each one of us are required to retreat into that cavern. And we may not need to eat a piece of the flesh of an alien grey, but the point is we're having to own hard truth, swallow the bitter pill, so to speak. And that's not easy for any of us. But that is very needful if we are to truly engage the mirror pool reflection of who we are. And it's only in that reconvention moment with self, actualization of self, that you are then reconnected, so to speak, with the divine umbilical. And at that point, you become an awakened son or daughter of God. And then you move into this temporal world doing right action and standing in pure truth and manifesting and embodying the highest value that you're able to, the highest expression that you're able to. And net of that, the reward of that is that you begin to see that not only can you anchor patterns of perfection into this world, but you can paint on the canvas of this world and manifest anything you choose, anything you wish.
Yeah, it's wonderful, all these different links that we've been talking about in terms of, you know, Credo Mutwa and also his links to the calendar. Enki's calendar, Adam's calendar, has got lots of names. He used to call it Inkanyezi, which means stones from the stars. But what I've come to understand about it, just in terms of my own journey, is that the Anunnaki came to get gold on this planet a long time ago, created a Genesis project there, and now we are kind of in a regenesis phase where, I guess, you know, after millions of years of being split, being separated, I guess, from our own divine essence, thinking that somehow the gods are out there and the answers out there, we're coming into this regenesis, as you put it, which I love. So it's the re-engineering really of ourself, our own genes, through our own mind, our own observations and our own alignment. That, you know, sovereign link to our own divine essence, you know, is re-engineering our own genetics. We are remaking ourselves. We are the gods. We are the, you know, the ones that are redoing this project on ourselves.
There's not a question there. All I can do is nod and sagely agree with you. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just
we're coming to the end of, let me speak for one moment to that.
Yes.
We're coming to the end of a cycle, a great cycle, and that this particular seeding of the Homo sapien, that this particular seeding of the human is reaching now its fulmination in this particular experimentation. I mean, one of the harshest things that we need to awaken to, each one of us, is that we are the alien, we are the demon, the Diablo, we are the angelic, we are the Celestine, we are all of those things. We are the confluence of all of those. We are the entanglement of all the genetic expression in this temporal universe, the 3D universe. And then on top of that, you need to impose the fact that we are also entangled with hyperdimensional, subdimensional, and superdimensional intelligences and timelines and probabilities and outcomes. It's beyond. I mean, we're, as David Icke reminds the world, we are observing reality through an incredibly narrow bandwidth of the visible spectrum of light, around which we have another 97, 98, 99% of reality that is explicit. It's there, but we cannot see it. We cannot touch it. We cannot feel it unless we are somewhat clairaudient or clairvoyant, and connected to our psionic intelligence. And those amongst us who are able to divine a deeper sense of reality than simply what's presented to us through the visible spectrum of light. But the fact remains that the Homo sapiens sapien is the atom seed of the entanglement of trillions of timelines and trillions of probabilities and outcomes. So the Anunnaki Sirius B 3,600-year elliptical orbit, all of that story about Nibiru is absolutely true. It's real, it's entirely correct, but it's not the only story that is entangled in the now. And I have arrived at a point where I have determined that all of these narratives, all of these stories, totems, archetypes, to some extent we should disentangle ourselves consciously from and disidentify entirely and simply salute each of these stories, these narratives, these archetypes. Thank them for the role that they played in any one of these entangled timelines into manifesting the now. But now that we are in the now and we are actualizing in this perfect moment in timelessness, because that's what focusing on the absolute now is, it's entering timelessness. And that is the only quanta wherein we can reconnect through the quantum to source consciousness, is recognizing the falsity of time, of TikTok, and of the great Maya, the great illusion. So the path of least resistance to the highest expression possible for the Homo sapiens sapien right now is to disentangle and disidentify with all idolatry, all storylines, all totemism, and simply begin to bear true witness to that which exists in the now. And that is where our shortest path to success is, and it's absolutely assured to each one of us.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to the idea of the second coming of Christ being the awakening within us of our own Christed nature, and that the apocalypse is really, I guess, in so many ways, like I mentioned on the last interview, it's about the awakening of our lost nature and how shocking it is because of the level of forgetting, really. And as we move into our galactic bandwidth, out beyond how we've identified ourselves, there can be, it's a process of strengthening and growing up immensely, because we've been very contracted and very small and self-identified in this tiny little prison for a long time, and have become weak in a way because of it. And as Micheal Ledwith speaks about, he says, Jesus is not coming back because once was more than enough on this planet, so it's now in our hands.
I like that. I like that very much. And I also like the fact that you used the word contracted. And I'd ask you to consider just for a moment the word contracted. It means constricted, to contract, as opposed to expand. So when we have exiled ourselves from our spiritual nature, we are in a state of contraction. And that contract, that nature of contracting, it also corresponds with the fact that we have surrendered sovereignty. In a state of spiritual constriction, we are surrendering sovereignty, soul sovereignty. And thereby we contract in this temporal world and engage contracts, because we no longer believe what's being said to us, because we cannot telepathically or psionically know the truth of anything, because we've disconnected ourselves from our spiritual capacity. So therefore we have to engage contracts with one another whilst we're in a state of contracting self. And it's very interesting that it's all connected. The conundrum is connected into that word.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I guess we've gone, I don't know what you think, but we've gone about as low as we want to go in terms of vibration, you know, in terms of the experience of this lowest possible density. And now I guess we've chosen to move back, with taking all of this experience back into a greater, more expanded form, but taking all of the experience with us.
I'm not sure that that's so. I'm not sure that we are coming out of the lowest vibratory capacitance. I suggest that the nadir point, that the lowest point, was arguably thousands of years ago. If we factor that there is a 26,000 year cycle in the grand precession of the equinox, and we've just come into quarter to 12, broken through that lateral horizon into the galactic day, I would suggest that it was about 6,000 odd years ago that we were arguably anchoring the lowest possible vibral or vibratory capacitance. There have always been sages, warlocks, flame keepers, wisdom keepers, shaman throughout the ages, avatars, and engaged in the divine process of bodhisattva, of highest service to humanity, who have volunteered to be here and suffer tremendously in different parts of storylines in our history. We know about the purges and the inquisitions and the crucifixions and so on. So the avatars and the sages who've come in and out notwithstanding, we probably hit the low point some thousands of years ago. And if you apply Mandelbrottian mathematics to the grand precession of the equinox, which I've certainly tried to do over a number of years, which is fractal mathematics, you get some very, very interesting nodes, spikes, ebbs and flows. Anyone interested in this somewhat abstract subject, I would recommend you also check out Terence McKenna's Time Wave Zero, which in a sense is not really relevant any longer because we crossed over that point. But it's very interesting how we have had moments of enlightenment, pulses of enlightenment, even through the darkest of ages in this world. We've reached points of almost breaking through into crystalline, celestine supernature, and then bang, being pulled right back down by a new Holy Roman Empire or conquistadors or whatever the hell. History is beset with these ebbs and flows of enlightenment. It would appear that the threshold event that we are migrating through right now, navigating through right now, is the ultimate threshold event in the 3D temporal sense, whereupon we will not be required any longer to move into the commonly accepted or understood cycle of time, as in the grand precession of the equinox. I believe that we are now bifurcating away from 3D temporal time, space, motion, and we're moving into, I think you could probably describe it as the spiral of Alcyone, into this hyperdimensional spiral. So it's a departure altogether from time and from mortality in that sense. And Cronus and the crown and empirical power and sovereignty and all of that dialectic that we've been caught up with in the binary nature of our world for thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions and millions of years. I believe we've just departed from that, or in the process of that right now. But my contention, Amanda, is that we have already succeeded. We've already arrived.
Absolutely. Yeah, we just in a sort of a slow arrival on the physical level into that thing that's already happened. Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And what a time to be alive, and what a time to be, sitting here in the front lines, you could say, going through and participating in this incredible experience. I must say, it's
well, we didn't buy the ticket to the front row. We all earned it. Billions of us earned the ticket to the front row, and here we are. It's also my contention that every single living soul who has ever lived or incarnated on planet Earth, more or less, is now in body. And that is why this overpopulation myth exists. I don't believe we're overpopulated for a second. I believe we could take 20, 30, 40 billion people without blinking on this planet, and way beyond that even, if resources were intelligently stewarded and shared, and the surface of the earth was inhabited intelligently according to nature's codes of fractality, and not these mutant Luciferian codes that create streets and petrochemical fossil fuels and city grids, which are all highly toxic Babylonian ideas. But when we move into anti-gravity and we move into the hyperdimensional physics, which myself and colleagues are very, very invested in right now and involved in, with breakthrough quantum technology, when these things are the mainframe and the mainstream, and that's happening right now, like in 18 months from now, 3 years from now, we could be having conversations, and the paradigm shift will have already occurred. We're now into 0 point over unity, energizing of the entire planet. We're moving into hyperdimensional spheres of reality. We're moving into a bypass of needing to get into combustible engines to move. When that really locks and loads in the next few years, that is also will be symbolic of the fact that we have now left the 3D linear plane. We're no longer driving in combustible vehicles on straight lines from one point to another, in traffic jams, stuck behind each other, cursing and effing and blinding. No, we've now moved off the surface of the earth, and we're now moving with anti-gravitational technology. That is symptomatic also of this next great stage in our spiritual evolution. And then, of course, you move to that point. That's also a technological experience I'm describing here. But when you move into the most heightened form of communication and transportation, this is pure telepathy, quantum broadcast, wordless. There's no words because there's no contracts. It's only pure truth exists. And where pure truth in one individual and pure truth in the other individual is aligned, there's absolute telepathic communication. There's no need to put contracts or words together. So we're moving ultimately into that space-time. Forgive me. No, let me be correct. We're moving beyond space-time to that quanta of perfect telepathic and psionic attunement and entwinement. That's where we're heading. Psionic communication and transportation through Merkaba, the capacity to be able to simply project in the truest fifth dimensional sense, and to be able to ideate and manifest. Boom. There is no space-time between. That was part of the great Maya, the great illusion that we're awakening from. When you truly know it to be Maya, that time and motion is Maya, when you absolutely know to bypass those functions yourself, and you're able to engage.
It's just gone frozen for a second. Let's just see. Wait a second, Sacha. Okay, so I was just going to say that in terms of some of the quantum physics breakthroughs that, the observer is creating and influencing reality, would you say that, each of us being our own observers are, creating and influencing the field that we're in, and that the dream spell that you speak about is really trying to just control the observer, you could say. And if you can control each observer through the mainstream media, through television, through technology, entrainment, that kind of thing, then you've still captured people to a certain extent in a dream that is false.
Yes, except it's not happening to us. We are permissioning it, conjuring it, and manifesting it. And that's the distinction. So when we recognize that I was never a victim of it, it never did anything to me that I did not create, manifest, conjure, affirm. That is the truth.
It's a beautiful, yeah, that's a very important.
And in that recognition, we then engage the protocols or the permissions to be able to transmute the apocalyptic narrative or the negativist narrative or the low vibratory narrative, and we can then transmute that into the other. And the other, of course, takes us into supernature one way or the other. And the closer we get to supernature, in a sense, the harder it is, the more, in a sense, the more it burns, and the heat is pretty intense. But we also know that re-engagement with the actualized aspect of who we are, who we be, who we have always been, is imperative. It's the only imperative that's left. That is the true beloved, in the sense of all the avatars, the Rumi poetry and the Khalil Gibran's, and all of these beautiful, noble ideals of the great beloved. This is it. The beloved is coming home to roost within the actualization of self.
Yeah, so any they is actually us. And in order to move out of a polarized, dualistic existence, we have to own the projections and say
in simple terms.
Yeah, these are all the many faces of the one.
You're right to use the term projections, because it is projections. It's all projected images. Each one of us are the progenitor in the still point of the void of the creator. We are the ones who are projecting images into the field. All that we're looking at right now and seeing one another, with the idea that you're in South Africa, I'm in Indonesia, and we're using fractal mathematics and Z equals Z squared plus C applied to computer screens. That blah, blah is all part of the noise within the great illusion. The fact of the matter is that you and I self-exist, self-reveal in exactly the same quantum in source consciousness as the one of the same. We're all dancing, playing in the void right now. Point being, if we're going to do that, let's have fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm all for that. And, just finding my way through all of this, because at some points I remember like, oh, this is what I'm doing here. This is what it's all about. And then there's other points at which I feel completely kind of lost and caught up again in, I guess, that self-created game of, oh, I'm lost, now I'm found. There's going to be a point at which I wonder if there's ever a hide and seek, the end of that game. Oh, how fun.
There is. The end of it is when we've truly suffered. And this is where all suffrage is self-imposed again. But when we have drowned ourselves in the abysmal depths of sorrow, because we can only ever drown ourselves. We can blame the husband or the wife or the lover or the mother, the father, we can blame the third party, but it is always ever and only ever ourselves who do unto ourselves. So once we have drowned ourselves fully in the abysmal depths of our own suffrage, pain, sorrow, in the trial of separation that we are apparently exquisitely exploring, each one of us, when we have arrived at that death point and that regenesis, that rebirth point, that's when it's over. I do not suffer that any longer. I'm happy to say, Amanda, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that I'm enlightened, but I am absolutely stating that I do not suffer from any binarization in my nature or my inner character. I am so settled upon the duende line of who and what I be, who and what I am, that I've long since, thank God, not afflicted myself with any of those notions. And I'm simply focused with getting on with the business of affirmation and creative expansion, which is the stuff that excites me the most. And of course, restoration of things like natural law, natural justice in a world that is so utterly fucked up, that becomes a creative imperative to me as well, to restore natural order, natural justice, or to do whatever I can in that noble task.
Mm. So in this inner alchemy process that's being reflected outside in the world, so it's what I'm understanding is it's this marriage, this alchemical marriage back to a fifth dimensional state that we already are, this super hyper consciousness, hyper dimensional being. So that's the one marriage that's coming back in. How do you think this is going to look in terms of the financial system? I know that we're just at the brink of a big restructuring. Can you just speak a little bit about what you think is going to come down?
Sure. Well, we're seeing already the early stages of the absolution of debt. All debt will be eradicated. Mortgages, car payments, things that inhibit our capacity to engage our work and play in honor. Those will be the first things. So student debt, mortgages, payments on cars and things like that, essentials basically. The debt connected to essentials and essential living, working and playing will be absolved, has to be absolved. Beyond that point, debt will still exist for a time. I don't think it'll exist for long. I was the one, I believe, saying 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I was absolutely the one saying, and I've maintained it, that within 10 years, we would see the end of government, all government. And I believe we're absolutely seeing that now. We're seeing the catastrophic failure of the fifth column, which is the invisible government, the one that has been out of sight, but the so-called deep state. It's underway. The speed, efficiency of that deconstruction will depend almost entirely on the degree to which humankind are able to wake up from within this self-imposed dream spell. So the business of taxes and paying taxes or no longer paying taxes will speed that process up. So the more conscious people there are that tell the bureaucrat to go and fuck themselves and stand down of government and of the abrogation of our sovereignty through this Luciferian government institutions and bureaucratic institutions, that's where the battleground is going to be a fun place in the next year or 2 or 3 years. So the global financial circuitry and infrastructure is very directly connected to that bureaucratic machinery and technocratic machinery. But because the eradication of essential debt is underway, it is going to be toppling the entire premise of planetary bureaucracy and technocracy in any event. So we will see a categorical end, termination of bureaucracy as we know it, technocracy as we know it in the next probably 3 years. And that to me is the great news for humankind. Are we going to be under an ever higher, more vigilant kind of metadata surveillance protocol? Probably yes, for a time. I mean, there are 45,000 satellites being put up right now by that moron Elon Musk. Just that little sock puppet alone is responsible for the proliferation of almost 50,000 satellites. We've got hundreds of thousands of satellites in orbit. They are there as the utility of the Babylonian priesthood and the comptrollers and the invisible mastery, the intelligence and military intelligence infrastructure, which all feeds back to central command. But central command itself is under auto-destruct as well. Mm-hmm. How do we repurpose the infrastructures that we've got and utilize these satellite networks to beam Tesla frequencies back to the surface of the Earth to upgrade our planetary experience? That's all very possible. Right now, within days, we could remediate all the disharmony at the atomic and cellular molecular level in the oceans and in the air and in the soil. Literally within days, we have phase conjugation, plasma shielding, and torsion, scalar technology innovations that could absolutely, and we're talking magic wand, technologies. And I'm not just talking about the ones that are in the basement at the, you know, Pentagon or the Smithsonian Institute or the British Museum or the Vatican Library. I'm not talking about the sequestered ones. I'm talking about the ones we actually know and have. And you're looking at somebody who's incubating some of those with Humanitad. So we are actually, we are clinically trialing a number of technologies right now, magic wand technologies. From Thomas Bearden, which is something I'll be speaking about shortly, the work of a very great living scientist that I'm now working with, and the Professor Lakisevich, who is innovated the 5G Bioshield technology, a plasma shield. We've done 4 independent clinical studies in 4 different countries in Europe in the last 4 months. It's absolute. We can now completely shield all living systems from these harmful radiations, which are causing entropy, which is disease, decay, death. And once you've arrested entropy at the cellular level, the atomic level, it's over, baby. We're now talking about true regenesis, because we're talking about immortality. We're talking about being able to extend our lives limitlessly, provided we don't get hit by a bus. But once we stop driving around in buses, the bus won't be a problem anymore. God knows we don't need buses. It's all underway. It's all happening. It's all bloody good, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a very, very exciting time. And Sacha, won't you talk a little bit about the 5G and the technology that you're making available just to help people?
Sure. It's the 5G Bioshield, and the site is www.5gbioshield.com to anyone who's interested. This is something I am so proud and willing to stand on rooftops and scream about, because again, I've been involved for the last few months, or Humanitad has been involved, and we've observed the clinical studies. I've been to 7 countries with Jacques Bauer and Professor Lakisevich in the last few months, and attended multiple meetings and observed, I think, over 2,000 testimonials, feedback, 2,500, something like that, from individuals whose lives have been changed. So this is something I am really happy. I've never banged a drum on a product before. I've never, ever put my name or my face behind something, but this I will push out. And as soon as this pantomime is over, I'll be hitting a coast-to-coast US tour to get this out, because the world needs this shielding, not just from 5G, but from all harmful radiation, again, which is the premise of disease, decay, and death. You only die because you have a disease. You have a mutant molecular, atomic, and cellular conditions. And that only happens because we are not shielded from mutant frequencies, vibrations, and radiations. Once we are shielded through a plasma bubble from any mutant or harmful life-depleting frequency, you have now arrested the thing that kills you and gives you disease and old age. And now you can, because you're now shielded in a plasma bubble, you can start to rebuild all the atomic matrix, cellular and molecular matrices of the human technology. Will start to restore and go back into their true spin, their true coherence, their true geometry, because that's the nature of who and what we are. We move into the default of the divine blueprint that self exists behind us. You die and get disease because your body stops being able to defend itself. The vibral divine nature of who we are in that blueprint, it gets to a threshold point in this poisoned world where we can no longer upkeep the fight against the entropic invasion of these frequencies and vibrations. And so now that we can create a plasma bubble around ourselves, our homes, our farms, our whatever, we can start that regenesis, that restorative protocol at the cellular and atomic level. That's the majesty of this technology, the 5G Bioshield technology.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think it's very, very important. And I encourage everybody to get hold of a Bioshield to, you know, just help navigate this time, because we do need to restore ourselves. And the technology, the plasma technology, including the sacred geometries and the frequencies of gold and ultraviolet blue, these kinds of things very, very important for, you know, I think we will be, that is who we are. And so let's remember that.
Bravo, bravo.
Sacha, just before we end, I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you feel is important to address, just in terms of the coming days. It seems like we might be going into 10 days without the internet.
I'm hoping.
Any thoughts about what might be happening during that time?
I'm hoping that that's the case. I'm very much hoping that that's the case. 10 days of darkness for me would be a true chapter of death and rebirth. It would demarcate the line in the sand. I don't care if it's satellites being shot out of the sky, or if it's the giant switch being hit by the Pentagon. I just think that the absolute cessation of the white noise, of the trivia of our usual commerce and exchange and information transfer and knowledge transfer, if that were to stop absolutely in its tracks, even if it was for 10 minutes, it would demarcate a line in the sand. If it's 10 days, so much the better. It's rather like the business of going into cloisters, going into one day of silence a month or a year. It's the most incredibly empowering thing. Fasting. So the world needs it. And if it does happen, again, I remind people, it is not happening to us. It is us permissioning it unto ourselves. It will be a collective will that is manifesting, no matter how it's playing out. So let's own that space at all times. Never depart from that knowing that whatever appears on the radar screen of your life is divinely elected and permissioned by you. And it is there to serve you as the path of least resistance to your highest becoming. So simply begin to step into true humility and become the meek that inherits the earth. And the meek, by distinction, is he or she who can sit upon the throne of self without casting any stones, without any judgment, causing no harm, loss, or injury to another living soul, and bearing pure witness to that which is.
Amen to that. That's beautiful. So, Sacha, I think that's a great way to end. I think we can wrap it up unless there's anything left from your side.
I'm late for a visit with the high priest in the south of the island. I have to run to the car now. But
thank you so much. So much love to you. We'll see you on the other side of this little journey of 10 days.
God bless you.
Bye-bye. You too. Bye.